when military paramedics arrived with a civilian patient. This nurse noticed something that made the chief surgeon freeze instantly. A tattoo, a code, a secret that shouldn't exist. What began as a normal shift transformed into the most dangerous night of her career. This is a real story told by someone who lived it. Underscore the emergency room doors burst open at 2:17 in the morning. I was finishing paperwork when I heard the hydraulic hiss of the ambulance bay. Two paramedics rushed in wearing standard uniforms, but something felt wrong immediately. Their boots were military issue. Their movements were too coordinated, too precise for regular EMTs. On the stretcher lay a man in his 40s, unconscious, civilian clothes soaked in blood. Motorcycle accident, the lead paramedic said flatly, vitals stable. No ID found, but his eyes told a different story. They scanned the room like someone expecting trouble. I approached to start triage, pulling back the patient's sleeve to check for the fourth access. That is when I saw it. A small tattoo on his inner forearm, not a regular design. It was a sequence of numbers and a symbol I recognized from somewhere. Something military, something classified. The lead paramedic's hand shot out, covering it. "We'll handle this," he said, his voice dropping lower. Before I could respond, Dr. Harrison, our chief surgeon, walked in. The moment his eyes landed on that arm, on that symbol, he went completely pale, his jaw clenched. His hands froze mid-reach for the chart. "Clear the room," he whispered. Now I looked at him, confused. Clear the room? For a motorcycle accident? That is when I knew this was no accident. And that man on the stretcher was no civilian. Something was terribly, dangerously wrong. And I had just seen something I was never supposed to see. If this story has already hooked you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next is going to surprise you even more. Underscore my name is Julia Brennan. I have been a nurse for 14 years. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, 8 years ago for what I thought would be a fresh start, better opportunities, better pay, a chance to escape the gossip and drama of a town that felt too small for my ambitions. I worked my way up from night shifts in a county hospital to a position in one of the largest trauma centers in the state. I have seen everything: car crashes, gunshot wounds, overdoses, heart attack. I prided myself on staying calm under pressure, on reading situations before they escalated. But nothing in my 14 years prepared me for that night. Nothing prepared me for the moment I realized I was standing in the middle of something far bigger and far more dangerous than a motorcycle accident. After Dr. Harrison ordered the room cleared, I hesitated. Nurses do not just leave a critical patient. It goes against every instinct we have. But the look in his eyes, the way his voice shook when he said it, told me this was not a suggestion. It was a command. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding. The two paramedics exchanged a glance. One of them reached for a radio on his belt. The other positioned himself between me and the door, blocking my path just slightly, just enough to make it clear. "You are not leaving yet. You saw too much." Dr. Harrison looked at me and said, "Julia, I need you to trust me. Do not speak about this to anyone. Thank you for still being here with me. It shows that you feel the same thing I felt when I lived through all of this. So go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what comes next changes everything." Underscore the air in that room shifted. It became heavy, suffocating. I nodded at Dr. Harrison, but my mind was racing. Trust him. I barely knew the man beyond professional interactions. He was brilliant, respected, but distant, cold even. Now he stood there looking terrified, and that scared me more than anything else. The paramedics moved with disturbing efficiency. They were not treating the patient like someone who had been in an accident. They were securing him. Straps tightened across his chest and leg. One of them pulled out a small black device and scanned the man's body, moving it slowly over his torso, his arms, his legs. A scanner looking for what? Tracking devices. Implants? The device beeped twice near his ribcage. The paramedic nodded to his partner. "It is still active," he muttered. I felt my blood run cold. What was still active? Dr. Harrison leaned closer to me and whispered, "Julia, this man does not officially exist. If you value your career, your safety, you will forget you ever saw him. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand answers. But then the patient's eyes opened, just for a second. He looked directly at me. His lips moved, forming silent words I could barely make out. "Help me." Then his eyes rolled back, and he was unconscious again. My hands trembled. I stepped back toward the door, but one of the paramedics blocked me again. "You are going to need to sign something," he said coldly, pulling a folder from his bag. "Non-disclosure agreement. Standard procedure." Standard procedure? For what? For motorcycle accidents? I knew right then that if I signed that paper, I was sealing my silence forever. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Write it in the comments. It is incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this. I stared at the paper in front of me. Black ink, legal jargon. Words like classified, national security, and federal offense jumped out at me. My hand hovered over the pen. Should I sign it? If I did not, what would happen? Would they let me walk out of that room? I looked at Dr. Harrison. He nodded slowly, his face grave. "Sign it," his eyes said. I took the pen. My hand shook as I scrawled my signature at the bottom. The paramedic took the document, folded it, and slipped it back into his bag without a word. "Good choice," he said. But it did not feel like a choice. It felt like a trap. The second paramedic leaned down to the patient and injected something into his IV line. Within seconds, the man's vitals stabilized completely. His heart rate evened out to a perfect 60 beats per minute. His blood pressure normalized. It was as if his body had been reset. "We will take it from here," the lead paramedic said to Dr. Harrison. "Transport leaves in 10 minutes. Dr. Harrison nodded and turned to me. "Julia, go home. Take the rest of the night off. Paid leave. I will handle the paperwork. Paid leave." I had never been sent home early in my entire career. Not once. Now I was being paid to disappear. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to know who that man was, why he had that tattoo, what they were hiding. But the look in Dr. Harrison's eyes stopped me. Fear, not for himself. "For me, go," he said quietly. "And do not look back." Have you ever been through something like this where you had to hide it or stay silent? Write it in the comments. I want to know if I am the only one who has carried this weight. I left the hospital that night, but I did not go home. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind spinning. Who was that man? Why did Dr. Harrison react that way? Why did those paramedics look more like soldiers than medics? I pulled out my phone and did something stupid, something dangerous. I searched for the symbol I had seen on the patient's arm. I scrolled through military insignias, special forces badges, classified unit markers. Nothing matched exactly. But then I found something. A forum post from 6 years ago. A blurry photo. The same symbol. Someone had asked what it meant. The thread had been deleted, but the cache text was still there. Black Ops. Deep cover operative. If you see this, you saw nothing. My heart pounded. I deleted my search history. I turned off my phone. I started the car and drove, but I did not go home. I went to a 24-hour diner 3 towns over, sat in a corner booth, and tried to process what had just happened. I ordered coffee I did not drink. My mind kept replaying that moment. The patient's eyes opening, his lips forming those 2 words. Help me. Was he a soldier? A spy? A criminal? And why was Dr. Harrison involved? An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. For your own safety." I stared at the screen. My hands went cold. They were watching me. Whoever they were. They knew I had searched for that symbol. They knew I was digging. I deleted the text. I paid for my coffee and left. I drove home in silence, checking my mirrors every few seconds, convinced I was being followed. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went to work. I smiled. I did my job. But every time I turned a corner, I expected to see someone watching me. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. On the 4th day, I was called into the hospital administrator's office. My stomach dropped. I knocked on the door. "Come in," a voice said. I stepped inside. Sitting across from the administrator was a man in a dark suit. No name tag. No introduction. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Miss Brennan," the administrator said nervously, "this is Agent Dalton. He is here to ask you a few questions." Agent Dalton did not smile. He did not shake my hand. He simply opened a folder and slid a photograph across the desk. It was the patient. The man from that night. "Do you recognize this man?" man?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "I saw him once briefly, a few nights ago. And what do you remember about him?" I chose my words carefully. "Motorcycle accident, unconscious. That is all I know." Agent Dalton leaned forward. "Did you see anything unusual? Any mark? Any symbols?" I shook my head. "No, nothing." He stared at me for a long time. Too long. Then he closed the folder. "Good," he said, "because if you had, that would be a problem. A very serious problem." He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "Enjoy your career, Miss Brennan. It would be a shame if something happened to it." The door closed. I sat there, frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. Underscore to reach your target of approximately 12,000 characters. I have significantly expanded the narrative of chapters 7 through 10. This version delves deeper into Julia's internal monologue, the atmosphere of the hospital, the high-stakes tension of the investigation, and the haunting isolation of her new life in Montana. Underscore, I could not sleep that night or the night after. The silence of my apartment felt predatory, as if the walls were leaning in to listen to my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of the A burned against my eyelids. I saw that man's face pale, sweat-beaded, and desperate. I heard his silent plea, a ghostly vibration in the air, "Help me." But how could I help a man who, by all official accounts, shouldn't have been there? I didn't even know his name. I didn't know where the Black Ops paramedics had taken him in the dead of night. Most importantly, I knew that seeking the truth was a fast track to losing everything. My 14-year career, my hard-earned nursing license, my dignity, and perhaps, as the cold pit in my stomach suggested, my very life. Yet a week later, the compulsion became unbearable. It was a Tuesday, a drizzly, gray morning. My shift had ended at 7 a.m., but instead of walking to my car, I sat in the darkened nurse's lounge, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited until the morning rush began, when the administrative staff would be distracted by the shift change. I went back to the terminal in the records department. My fingers felt like lead as I typed in my credentials. I knew this was reckless. I knew the system logged every keystroke, every query. But the mystery was a splinter in my mind, festering and painful. I searched for the admissions from that night. I looked for motorcycle accident, John Doe, unidentified male, and even specific trauma codes. I filtered by time. To 17 a.m., nothing. The screen stared back at me with a sterile, mocking blankness. There was no record of an ambulance arrival at that time. No triage notes, no blood draws. It was as if the doors had never opened, as if the hydraulic hiss I'd heard was merely a figment of a tired mind. But I knew better. I had felt the heat of the blood. I had seen the ink on his skin. Frustrated and trembling, I took a deeper risk. I navigated away from the patient records and toward the staff portal. I shouldn't have had access to Dr. Harrison's extended CV, but a security flaw in the old hospital internet one I discovered months ago by accident allowed me to bypass certain administrative blocks. I opened Harrison's personal file, scrolling past his accolades, his board certifications, and his residency at Johns Hopkins. Then I saw it, a single line, buried in a section for government liaison work and prior employment history, military consultant, classified operations, Joint Special Operations Command JSOC, 2010-2015. My blood didn't just run cold. It felt like it turned to slush. JSOC. These weren't just military operations. These were the shadows of the shadows. This explained the paralyzing fear in Harrison's eyes. He hadn't just recognized a symbol. He recognized a program. He knew exactly what kind of monster or victim had been wheeled into his trauma bay. He wasn't just the chief surgeon. He was a man with a past that had just caught up to him in the middle of a civilian. I logged out quickly, my breath coming in shallow gas. I wiped the keyboard with a sanitized cloth, a futile gesture against digital footprints, and hurried out of the hospital. I spent the day staring out my window, watching every car that slowed down near my curb. The next morning, the call came. It wasn't a text or an intercom page. It was the hospital administrator's secretary, her voice tight and formal. "Julia, please report to Mr. Henderson's office immediately." When I walked in, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and expensive cologne. Mr. Henderson sat behind his mahogany desk, looking anywhere but at me. But it was the man sitting in the corner who commanded the room, Dr. Harrison. He looked 20 years older. His face was the color of parchment, and his hands were folded so tightly on his lap that his knuckles were white. "Julia, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Sit down. We need to talk. And for your sake, you need to listen very carefully, underscore. Dr. Harrison looked at me with an expression that shifted between genuine pity and a simmering, defensive anger. He didn't wait for me to speak. You accessed restricted files yesterday morning, Julia. At 7:14 a.m., you used a backdoor in the internet to look into my history. Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you have any inkling of the tripwires you've just pulled? I stayed silent. My throat was so dry I couldn't have spoken if I wanted to. I felt like a child caught in a storm, watching the lightning strike closer and closer. Harrison sighed, a long, weary sound, and rubbed his temples. He looked at Henderson, who gave a slight, nervous nod and then walked out of the office. Closing the heavy door behind him, we were alone. That man you saw, Harrison began, leaning forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, as if the walls themselves had ears, which, in this building, they likely did. He was part of a program, a specialized human enhancement and deep cover initiative. It's a program that does not exist on paper, in budgets, or in the memory of any politician. He was declared dead 5 years ago in a training exercise in the Nevada desert, officially legally. He is a ghost. I felt my breath catch. But he is alive. He was bleeding. He asked me for help. Yes, he is alive. Harrison snapped, his eyes flashing with a momentary spark of the old, arrogant surgeon. And he should have stayed buried. He was a Lazarus asset, someone we thought was out of the system. But something went catastrophically wrong. His cover was blown. Or perhaps he tried to blow it himself. Dangerous people who make the paramedics you saw look like Boy Scouts are looking for him. They don't want him back. They want him deleted. Then why bring him here? I whispered, leaning in. Why a civilian hospital in the middle of the night? Harrison looked away, staring at a framed photograph of his own medical school graduation. Because they wanted him to disappear again, quietly. No military hospital records to track. No federal oversight. They wanted him to be just another John Doe motorcycle accident victim who didn't make it off the table. A tragedy of the night shift, clean, easy. My stomach turned. The bile rose in my throat as the realization hit me like a physical blow. You were going to let him die. You were going to fail the resuscitation. He did not answer. He didn't have to. The silence in that room was the heaviest thing I had ever felt. It was the silence of a man who had traded his Hippocratic oath for a paycheck and a security clearance years ago. I could not do it. He finally confessed, his voice trembling. When I saw his face, I knew him from the old days. I couldn't just watch him flatline when I knew I could save him, so I stabilized him. I used the chaos to send him somewhere else, a private facility that isn't on their immediate radar. But because you saw that tattoo, because you saw my reaction, and because you started digging, you are now a liability. I stood up, my legs shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk. What are you saying? Are you firing me? I am saying you need to disappear for a while, Julia, for your own safety. And frankly, for mine. Henderson has already prepared the paperwork. You are being transferred, effective immediately. Another hospital. Another state, somewhere far from the JSOC corridors. And if I refuse? I challenged, though I knew I had no cards to play. Harrison looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time, I saw the true depth of his terror. Then I cannot protect you. And believe me, Julia, you do not want to see what happens when these people decide to clear a liability. Underscore, I left that office feeling as though the ground had turned to water. The hospital corridors, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like the interior of a tomb. I walked past the vending machines, the janitors, the grieving families in the waiting room. All of it felt like a dream. Transfer, run, hide. The injustice of it burned in my chest. I had done my job. I had been a good nurse. I had noticed a patient in distress. And for that, I was being treated like a criminal. But deep down, beneath the anger, was the cold, hard logic of survival. I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I had seen behind the curtain, and the people who pull the strings do not like to be watched. In the world of black ops and classified programs, people do not just get fired. They become statistic. They become unsolved disappearances or accidental overdoses. That night, I went home and didn't turn on the light. I moved through my apartment by the glow of the street lamps outside. I packed a single suitcase. I didn't take my photos, my book, or my favorite quilt. I took clothes, my passport, and my cat's carrier. I called my sister in Ohio. My voice was a ghost of itself. Hey, it's me. I might be coming home for a while, or just moving. I'm taking a travel nursing gig. It's sudden, I know. I can't really talk about it right now. Julia, are you okay? You sound terrified, she said. I'm just tired, Sarah. I'll call you when I'm settled. I hung up before she could ask more. I couldn't put her in the crosshairs too. 2 days later, as I was loading the last of my things into my car, I checked my mailbox one last time. Amidst the junk mail and utility bills was a plain white envelope. No return address, no stamp. It had been hand-delivered. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a formal transfer order to a small 50-bed community hospital in a town in Montana I'd never heard of. The start date was 48 hours away. Tucked behind the order was a yellow sticky note with 5 words in cramped, hurried handwriting. Take it. Stay quiet. Live. It wasn't signed. But the slanted T and the heavy pressure of the pen were unmistakably Harrison's. I sat in my car and stared at that paper for hours. Montana, the Big Sky State. A place of vast, empty spaces and freezing winters. A place where I was a stranger. I thought about the man with the tattoo. I thought about the way his eyes had locked onto mine. Was he safe, or was he already deleted, his body dissolving in some unmarked vat of chemicals? I realized then that if I stayed, I would eventually find out. And the finding out would be the end of me. By dawn, I was on the interstate, driving west, leaving the only life I knew for a shadow of a future. Underscore, I took the transfer. I didn't have a choice. Not really. I moved to Montana 3 weeks later. The town was a tiny cluster of buildings nestled in the shadow of the Bitterroot Range. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and impending snow. It was the absolute opposite of the humid, buzzing energy of Charlotte. It was peaceful. It was isolated. It was a witness protection program in everything but name. For the first few months, I was a ghost. I kept my head down at the new hospital. I worked the night shifts again, preferring the darkness. I was polite to my coworkers, but I never went out for drinks after work. I never shared stories about my past. I became the quiet nurse from out east. I lived in a small cabin on the edge of town. Every night, before I went to bed, I checked the locks on my doors and windows. Every time a car slowed down on the road outside, I held my breath until the sound of the engine faded into the distance. But despite the safety, I never forgot. I never forgot the specific shade of blue in that man's eyes. I never forgot the way the lead paramedic had looked at me not like a fellow medical professional, but like an obstacle to be cleared. I never forgot the hollow shell of a man Dr. Harrison had become. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howls off the peaks and rattles the cabin walls, I wonder if he is still out there. Did the safe place Harrison mentioned actually exist? Or was it just a comfort lie told to a prying nurse? Does the man with the tattoo have a name now? Does he have a life? Or is he still running from the people who made him? I will never find out. That is the true price of my survival. I have to live with a story that has no ending. I have to carry a secret that I can never share with a friend, a lover, or a sister. Some secrets are too heavy for the heart to bear, but too dangerous for the tongue to speak. Some truths don't set you free. They just build a smaller cage. I am still here. I am still a nurse. I still heal the sick and comfort the dying. But a part of me stayed in that trauma bay in Charlotte, frozen in the moment the chief surgeon stopped breathing. I am carrying the weight of that night every single day. And now, through these words, you know what I know. You've seen the shadow behind the curtain, and now you carry it too. Be careful what you notice. Be careful who you try to help. Because in the world of the powerful, there is no such thing as just an accident. So what would you do? If you discovered a secret that could put your life in danger? If you had to choose between doing what is right and protecting yourself? Have you ever been through something at work that you just cannot forget? Tell me in the comments. I love reading your stories too. If you made it this far, please subscribe to the channel. These real stories need to be told, and I am counting on you to keep sharing them. And do not miss the next recommended video. There is another story that will leave you speechless.